Hello, everyone. This is the, what is it, August 29th, 2023 occurrence of the P4.org open source developers meeting. Today we have a couple of presenters, which I will let them pronounce their names the way their mother intended them to be pronounced and let them give a brief introduction themselves, and please take it away.
Hi, thanks, Andy, for the introduction. So my name is Sébastien Mosser, and today I'm with Alexandre Lachance, who is here, and we're gonna like give a quick talk slash demonstration of the kind of work we're doing about modular language server, because it happened that it might be useful for the P4 community, considering that we're using P4 as an example of the kind of language this approach can support. As this is recorded, I have to state that we might be interrupted by a very grumpy cat who has to go to the vet in 2 hours and is very vocal about not wanting to go there. But well, without further ado, we can start. So we're from McCert, so McMaster University, located close to Toronto in Ontario, Canada. And together with five other faculty members, we are working in a research center, which is named McCert for McMaster Center Software Certification. And basically, as members of McCert, what we're doing is working on safety critical software intensive systems. This is kind of like the main business in the research center. So that include working with ultrasound medical device, next-gen vehicles, those kind of things. The lab also was a founding member of the Software Certification Consortium. And being a research lab that is really driven by industry collaboration and industrial problems, we're really relying on two pillars when we're working on stuff. Sorry. The first pillar is do not invent your own problems. So we're trying to work in close collaboration with industrial partners or practitioner to find things that make sense and can help developers. And the second pillar is to make it work. So having like engineering tools and method to solve problem at scale. Scale can be very, very different, but the main point is that we want, and we're really working on identifying real life problems and trying to kind of like get a solution that requires like good research to be done to be reached. So we're not really here to talk about ultrasound device or next-gen vehicle. We're really more here to talk about the software system part of what we're doing at MaxCert. So the example of projects we're focusing on software. How do we develop software? How do we maintain software? How can we provide better support for software developers? This is the kind of things that we're interested in this part of the center. So it goes with improving collaborative development by, for example, working on a Git merge algorithm to provide like more dedicated ones, supporting the build, release, and deploy of this installing and operating code on high-performance clusters, reverse engineering legacy system, improving them, all that. This is the kind of systems and kind of problems we're trying to tackle at the lab. And in this context, we are working with three amazing students. Alexandre, who is here today, who's a master's student here at Mac. Noel, who's a research assistant in the group working on his BEng, also at Mac. And we had the chance to host Maël last summer as a bachelor intern to also work on the things I'm going to present today. And as I was saying in the beginning, what we're doing is really to work with industrial partners and on real problems. So the work I'm presenting today is done in the context of a research project, which is named a DevOps framework for developing, operating, and evolving software-defined networks infrastructure and application. And the work is done in collaboration with TELUS, who's a telco provider here in Canada, and an SME which is named Kaloom, which was specialized in working with language like P4 and deploying SDN. And the project involves us at McMaster, but we only in the project to contribute on the language level because this is our expertise. And we're collaborating with ETS, which is a School of Engineering located in Montreal, Canada, and with Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. And together we're bringing like expertise to support how we can help the development of SDN infrastructure and application from a DevOps-ish point of view. And this project is supported by MITAX. It's an organization in Canada that supports industrial research, and NSERC, which is like the federal funding agency for research in Canada for science and engineering. So today, I will first talk about modular language server and why we're here. Like, why are we talking about supporting P4 and what we can do using this kind of approach. Then Alexandre will give a demonstration of the system. It's kind of like a next step of the first demo that was presented at the P4 days last spring in Santa Clara. And so since then we have added some stuff in the language server. And finally, we'll conclude by basically asking for help, but that will be a spoiler for that's a spoiler for the end of the presentation. So first, let's start with what do we call a modular language server, and what does it mean?
Quick question,
So,
Sebastian. Do you
sure.
Encourage questions throughout your presentation, or do you prefer to wait for the end?
As you wish.
Okay.
Like as you wish. We have time because I'm not sure that presentation plus the demo will last like 45 minutes or so. So we really have time for questions. If you feel free to interrupt, that's fine.
Sure. Thanks.
So modular language server. First off, before talking about modular language server, maybe we should just give a reminder of what a language server is and what's a language server protocol. So LSP, so language server protocol, it's a standard that was defined by Microsoft like not that long ago, but still it's now like the new normal to support a language. Because when you're working with an IDE, you're looking for features like autocompletion, go to definition, documentation when your mouse is over something. And developing this from scratch, like from A to Z, requires really significant effort. So the idea behind the language server approach was to take a client-server approach, actually. Let's externalize this from outside of the IDE and rely on a standard protocol that will say, oh, I want a code complete. I want to go to that definition. I want to get information about that symbol, all those kind of things. And so what they've done was to standardize this communication. It's called a language server protocol. And based on this, you can implement a language server. If it respects this interface, then you're fine because you can integrate with Vim, with Neo4j, with IntelliJ, sorry, with Visual Studio, and all those kind of classical IDE. So long story short, in the old world, without language server protocol, each element, like each IDE, was directly working with each language. And by using LSP, we're kind of like factorized this, saying that, oh no, we're just going to rely on standard interfaces. And then as long as you're respecting that interface, you can be plugged in any system. So then you would wonder, okay, where the research, what the points. You can have like, you can define the language server for the P4 language, and you can have like NeoVim or Visual Code or any Sublime, any IDE that would interact with that language server. This is more or less engineering. Doesn't mean that this is despicable. It just means that that might not be a research problem. The problems we're tackling, and it's actually visible in the P4 community, is that developing language server has a maintenance pattern which is named the dangerous puppy. Like, it's really easy to build a minimal one, and you can have one. It's a nice kitten. It's pretty cool. You can play with it and everything. But then maintaining a complete one becomes a dangerous beast because it's really, really hard to maintain everything and all these software components and all the different parts that are involved in defining a language server. So if you Google for P4 language server, you would find a lot of those. There's only the open source one that we can see, but they're more or less not really maintained. There was a really, really cool initiative from Intel, the P4 analyzer, who was started like a couple of years ago and was supported by a master student named Andre. And unfortunately, they stopped the development. But the whole point is that we are using the P4 language as an example of something which needs to be maintained over time. And here, our research as language engineer is how can we help developer of language server to go through this, like to be able to design the language server in a way that make them maintainable. That's basically the focus of the work we're focusing on. Sorry. So this has two dimensions. First is how can we stabilize such a development? How can we help people when they develop language server for P4, but any other language, could be a DSL, could be a GPL, any kind of language. How can we help people designing those systems? And the second one, which is more tailored and dedicated to a given language, is, okay, we have that language server, we have this amazing way of developing language server. How can we help? How can we really provide the right support? Because providing a support, that's something, okay, I can go to definition, I can give you like underlining in red some part of the code, that's pretty fine, we can do it. But do you need it? And among all the options that you have as developer, what is really needed? What do we need to integrate so that gives you a better support? So to tackle the first problems, so the stabilization, how can we help? We used a classical approach, which is decomposition, and we decided to focus on designing the internal of the language server as a set of reusable and composable elements. So that as a developer, you're creating a language server for P4, then you can really focus on what is specific to P4, and the composition engine will basically assemble your language specificities into something that makes a language server. And which is really interesting is that P4 triggers two kinds of modularity here. That's really why it's an amazing case study for us. First, we have everything that is classical for language server and language definition. You have to work with an abstract syntax tree, you have to work with a symbol table, you have to work with code completion filter and all those kind of things. So this is kind of like an internal modularity. It's what you need when, well, you're designing any language server. You will have symbols, you will have to navigate through the different elements. So this is pretty classical. What's pretty unique with P4 is that there's a huge tool ecosystem that is designed open source or also proprietary. So there's tuning, there's elements that are designed by different companies that are kind of like external of the language by itself. But that provide really good support and really good information that might be needed by the developers. Talking, for example, of the P4C compiler or P4 test that gives you static analysis of your code. You can have PED4, which gives you, again, simulation and kind of like testing by using STF files. You can have test generation thing. A lot of things can be integrated into your language support. So by analyzing and working on P4, we're really having those two like dual problems. One problem is how can we modularize the internal of the language server? And the second part is how can we make it compatible with external tuning that can give developer good feedback. So let's take a very simple example, which is code completion. You're writing your P4 code and suddenly you press a dot, and meaning that it's a structure and you want to get the inside of the structure to know what goes later on. So by using a language server, when you're doing this, well, you have your language server, which is a component, and that's total black box. You have no idea how it works. You just follow the language server protocol, and you send a code completion request saying, hey, this is my symbol, this is my location in the file. I'd like to get some completion proposal. And then the language server will do its magic. It will look in the context and symbol table, get contextualized completion, and build a response that is returned to the ID. That works. That's perfectly fine. Main problem here is that this is not reusable at all. Because if you just have this, like each language server being defined as a black box, each time you're doing the very same from scratch, because you have to do all the different steps. And as part of the process, manually depending on your own implementation choices. When we're working at the beginning with the P4 analyzer team, we spent like a couple of meetings to align and to look at the way the different AST was designed and it was defined to kind of like align so that that makes the approach compatible, for example. If we think in terms of modularity, what we have is actually that our language server is an assembly of services. If you think in terms of service-oriented architecture or those kind of, not necessarily SOA, but you basically defining what service you can render. And in that case, well, we have the first service, which is being a language server. So respecting the language server protocol, that's our gateway. So that's pretty technical. And then this actually dispatch, it's really a gateway, to the different other services as part of the system. And some of them can be more data related, like, oh, we've parsed the file. So we have the abstract syntax tree of the file. So now we know the code we're working on and the structure of the code we're working on. And this is actually related to a symbol table. If I'm talking about this variable, this is its type, this is location, this is dependencies, it's content, like all those kind of things. And the gateway can also provide you services like code completion or go to definition or all those kind of things. And this is just a business component. It's a service that we're rendering that actually use the lookup interface of the symbol table and to get like all the things that can be proposed as completion, and that would use some filtering mechanism to find a way to kind of like restrict what needs to be proposed, what can be proposed to the developer who is using the P4 language server. So basically, what we're trying to do is to use P4 as a case study to support the development of such components and such architecture. Like, how are those different components related together so that when you're developing something for a new language, you can basically just say, oh, this is my AST, this is how it's built from the grammar. And now through the use of this populate and load interface, I can have like all the rest that comes almost for free, except what's specific to P4. So that's basically the idea. Of course, it's a little bit more complex than what fits in that slide, but the whole point here was to give you a gist, give you like the idea of what we mean by modularity in this case. So we're really looking into identifying those components and finding the right way to assemble them. And the next step, because that works, but this is kind of like annoying because you still have to work. If you want to design your AST for P4, you have to write it the way that fits with your load and populate interface. So that is maybe not exactly what you need. So what we're trying to do now, and which is basically Alexandre's master thesis, is to try to entangle what was P4 specific from what is language agnostic. So can we find a way to define the way we look up in the symbol table, the way we populate the symbol table, which information that are language specific do we need so that we're able to populate and operate something in a way that makes it usable. So we're now trying, based on the implementation that we have of the P4 language server, to try to abstract it into something which is the framework and something for any language server and something which is P4 specific. And with the approach so far, our language server is becoming just a couple of lines, which are those lines here, which is basically get some rules that help us annotate the language, give us information about what the structure declaration is and how it interacts with the language server, and then just start with this. And then the rules are interpreted by the language server, which gives you a language server, a turnkey language server for the P4 language. The main difference and why it works is that we're not using, we don't have the same problem that when you're writing a compiler, because when you're writing a compiler, you have to go like to the middle end optimization, you have to support several backends, so your AST needs to be really rich to contain all those kind of information. In our case, we're in a context which is more like lightweight compilation. because that's really what we're doing. We're just basically putting a front end on the language so that it provides the right support to the developer. So it's a slightly different problem than designing a compiler, which allows us to try to kind of like entangle this and have less language specificity in what we're kind of like designing. The second part and the second kind of modularity that we're working on, still working with this idea of components and reusable thing, is the definition of a plugin system, because you can't have inside your language server a direct dependency to the compiler, because the compiler evolves quite often. It's quite lively. And so if each evolution of the compiler has impact on the language server, it becomes a maintenance nightmare. So we're really like isolating both. And what we need is actually the very same if we're calling P4C, if we're calling P4Test, Beta4, or any other tool. It's just like we need a wrapper. We need an uniform interface that is basically, oh, when we need support in our IDE from the compiler, this is what we need, and this is what we receive as output, like diagnostics, for example, saying that, oh, this value will never fit in that variable, those kind of things. The compiler can tell you those kind of information. So basically what we have with this plugin manager, which offers two interfaces. One is to register. So you're basically activating your plugin saying, oh, I want to use P4C, for example, as the plugin. And based on this, still with this idea of framework, like you can say, I want to activate this plugin on save, for example. So each time you're going to save in your IDE, well, the language server will call the right plugin, and the plugin will call P4C and will call the real executable. And those plugins, they're actually just wrapper, they're adapters, if we talk into object-oriented patterns. Their objective is simply to use that uniform way of returning diagnostics based on the context that is given to them and call the right executable. So we're calling P4C the right way, we're parsing the output of P4C and transforming this into something which makes sense from a language server point of view. So transforming the standard output of P4C into elements like diagnostic in a language server. Which is interesting here, and why it's a modularity problem, that when you have multiple plugins that returns information from the same location in the code, how do you compose those? Because sometimes they're redundant, sometimes an information might subsume information from another plugin. So it triggers information. We don't want to overwhelm. And that's, again, why, like I was kind of like spoiling the end of the presentation, but we need information from experts, from SME that are really working with P4, working with those tools. Which kind of relevant feedback do you have? So do you need, sorry, so that we can try to work on those composition rules at the plugin manager level.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can you go back? Thank you. First of all, this is super fascinating, but I was thinking about Petra because I got involved in that several years ago with Nate Foster, and it has all the grammar rules, right? And it's very concise, and it seems like an ideal plugin, right, to analyze the code, at that level, like the AST aspects, etc. So that's one comment, and the other is, these plugins, would it be ideal, for example, P4C, to have an option, let's say a flag that says, do this amount of analysis of the code for the purpose of this language server plugin invocation, right? Not just run the compiler as normal and give me the whole thing, but do this part of it that I need, like the front end. Does that make sense, that we improve these tools to give just what you need to make this work better?
I believe that's the point of P4Test. That only runs the diagnostics and doesn't compile. So yeah.
I get that, but even P4C as it's by itself, would there be ideally flag options that cater to incremental calls like this that are very fast?
Yeah, it's amazing question. questions, because the two are good. The first one related to Petra, what we have so far is really black box integration, and that's matched with your second question on the P4C. We assume that those tools were out of our control, which is true, so that we should kind of like try to decouple as much as possible. So we took like the public interface, which is invoking the command line, invoking the tool from the command line, and standard input, standard output. That's what we had. So just to demonstrate that we can virtually integrate with anything that use standard input and standard outputs, which is kind of like a huge class of systems. Doesn't work with everything, but works for a lot of systems. Of course, if we have a better way to plug in the system, we can have a plugin here, which is way smarter than just running a process with a command and getting the result. But that means that we need to make assumption on the tool we're calling, which wasn't our initial working hypothesis because we wanted to integrate a black box. But the more we know about the tool we're integrating, the better it is, because then we can be way like faster. For example, your idea of running P4C in a light way, which doesn't trigger all the machinery of doing everything, but just like, oh, I'm just interested in those kind of static analysis. Just here is a flag, just do it, and then give me the result back. That would be awesome. And that's basically a problem that we're shifting to the plugin developer. Because if you have the P4C and you know how it works to make it work that way, or if you modify your tools that work that way, just wrap it into a plugin, which is like our plugins are like 20, 50 lines of code. It's really basically reading standard in, well, pushing to standard in, reading from standard out, and instantiating the right thing from LSP. So that's it. And of course, the more you know, the more advanced your tool is, well, the better the plugin can be. So transitively, the better it can be for the developer at the end of the day, because they're the one receiving those information back. We're just a messenger here. We're basically giving a framework and giving like a messaging way of bringing this back to the user. So yeah, but that's something I forgot to mention at the beginning. We're language engineer. We're not P4 developer. I mean, I've done some very basic P4 development and that's it. So I can't qualify the P4 expert saying that, oh, this is what we need. This is the kind of support. That's why we're really seeking for support and looking for support. What do you guys need? Because then we can focus on what we'd like and what we have fun to do, which is the language engineering support and playing with those different components while also providing service to you and providing better support for you.
Hmm. I would guess that in the language server protocol world, has somebody already suggested that tools like this produce diagnostic output in JSON data form instead of stuff you have to parse ASCII text, for example?
The language server relies a lot on JSON, actually, like the way it communicates with the IDE. The main point, and it's this plugin approach is not really how people do it usually, which is what makes us original, because usually you would rely on an assembly of plugins at the IDE level. You would have a P4C plugin and the P4 language support and the Petra extension in your IDE, which means that the burden is on the developer to assemble those into a way that makes sense. So bringing this configuration and making something that makes sense for their very specific IDE, which is not necessarily what you want if you're working in a company. You'd like to have something which is more uniform and which can be replicated. You're onboarding a new engineer, bam, you have working environment that works for the good practices in the company. So that's why we're kind of like pushing this into something which is internal of the language server, because then this can be replicated. It's just configuration, it's standards, invocation, all those kind of things. Everything is kind of like pushed into the language server so that you can have this like a turnkey system.
So kind of taking off of something Andy said about the JSON output of, let's say, the compiler, and the structure here, maybe trying to create an interface between the plugin manager and the compiler, that's sort of an LPM assist API. That's so that and P4C is a great sandbox to play in because people in that community are very responsive. You can fork it and do your own things and then propose a pull request. Right? So you could come up with, let's say, initially a query API that's just a command line -- something LPM query, and it gives you the capabilities that it offers for an LPM plugin assist. And if those capabilities allow you to do something special, like give me a first pass scan or something, you could then invoke that command. So it's sort of something that can evolve over time. The first thing you need is the capabilities API. And if it doesn't have any, then you just have to call it bulk, heuristically know how it works. But once you have an API that says, okay, I'm P4C, but I have a few extra features for LPM servers, 2 or 3 options you can give it, then you can start using those and get fancier and fancier over time, but you've got a growth path.
Yep. That'd be a really cool avenue, but to do this, what we need is concrete scenarios of that's because we can develop the stuff like in a generic way, but that would be kind of like flaky eventually. So if we have like a concrete scenario, if we can put like the kind of example, like give me a first pass analysis, which kind of expectation do you have, then we can go like through this way, trying to kind of like tackle that requirement. That would be an amazing case study actually. To see what can be done in the language server, what needs to be tackled in the compiler, the role of the compiler, which is heavy compilation environment, with the language server, which is a light compilation environment. Like what goes into which world? That's amazing research question. I'd really love to investigate this.
Well, there's probably other people who have better suggestions for what's a good concrete use case. So I'll stop there. I'm just kind of, improvising here.
Well, thanks. It's really good feedback. And that's basically a transition to that's perfect transition, because really what we're looking for is this kind of feedback, those kind of use case. Which kind of service would you expect from your language server? Okay, we can code complete, we can go to a given definition, we can give you access to documentation or whatever. Okay, we know how to do it. That's basically language server 101. What do you need? Do you need information more related to specification, to the testing, to simulation, to the back end of the compiler, to the front end of the compiler? Which part of the super rich P4 ecosystem do you need so that we can provide a better support? And by better supporting the P4 community, you're actually triggering research challenges in the engineering of the language server, which is kind of like a win-win situation, because we're doing something that's useful for people, plus we're improving our knowledge and solution into how to design language server. So there's at the end of the presentation, there's a form where you can submit feedback, but feel free to shoot messages, send emails, contact us, like discussing. We're really eager to get those kind of feedback from users. Mm-hmm. And then I think the floor will be for Alexandre to give like a demo of what's happening. So I will stop sharing.
Should be good. All right. So right now I have the language server working in both our VS Code extension and in NeoVim, which is like a fork of Vim. It would work in Vim also. I'll just go through a bit of the features we have working right now. I'll just show it in NeoVim because I'm more familiar, but all of what's working in NeoVim also works in VS Code. The first thing is highlighting. Right now we have like editor-specific highlighting with the language server highlighting that are working together. If I remove the editor-specific, now we only see the highlighting that's coming from the language server. It's a good demonstration of the coverage that we currently have of P4 files. Like everything's work in progress, and we have like small bugs like comments not fully highlighting or something like that. But yeah, we're highlighting stuff that's present in our structures internally. Everything from types to variables and stuff like that. I'll just make everything prettier again. All right. Other stuff we have basic syntax checking. So if I break the syntax, I'm going to get error lines on where the syntax isn't ready to compile. We also have renaming. For renaming, for example, I want to rename a type, I can rename it, and it's going to change it file-wide. And it's smarter than a replace because it only replaces usages of that type and not just the word in the file. We also have go to definition. If I go here, I can, well, I have a shortcut, but I can jump to the definition of the symbol, just to have a quicker way of moving around files. We also have hover information, where you can see, if you hover over a symbol, you can see its type. For header, it's of headers type. Other stuff we're working right now is completion of everything that's in scope. We're not really filtering it yet, but we're working on that. And finally, I think the best thing right now we have is plugin support. So if I save the file, I'm going to get feedback from my plugins. Right now, I only have a P4 test plugin, which tells me that the field IPv4T is not a member of the struct headers. That's coming directly from P4 test. So if I remove that and resave, no errors anymore.
So did you invoke P4 test, the whole executable, and you scraped that string out of the error message?
Yeah, we basically parsed it into like a language server.
You were able to get a standardized output that was already structured. It would be really nice, wouldn't it? Then you don't have these heuristics.
Yeah, it would be better.
Is this something, sorry, is this something you're looking for, a standardized output? This might be really easy to add to P4C. At least the errors.
Would be easy.
I was about to say Fabian be the person to talk to here.
Yeah.
Perfect.
That'd be awesome, actually. That'd be easier, because so far we're kind of like cutting and manipulating string to extract information, which works-ish. But of course, if there's like a standardized way to get the output of the like a JSON or even like a CSV, like just a structured way of being sure that we'll find the right information, that'd be really awesome.
Yeah, so I think P4C collects all the errors in encounters while type checking and everything, and then prints them. So there might be a way to get a formatted output of it, but I need to take a look.
Yeah, the problem we add is that the preprocessor errors are not the exact same. They're not formatted in the exact same way as the P4C errors. So yeah, there might be an issue there. It might not be a straightforward thing to fix.
Yeah,
even if we can't make them all consistent, making some of them easily parsable was probably a win.
Yeah.
If you can take all the P4C output, preprocessor output that's unstructured and just lump it into one object, at least you'll know to scrape that heuristically, and then the other stuff we could be more deliberate about, right?
Yeah. I think that's basically it for the demo. So yeah, everything's working in VS Code and in
couple quick questions for you.
Yeah.
So many P4 projects, besides including core and V1 model or TNA.P4, often break up their program into including multiple user-defined files as well. Do you work across does go to definition work across that?
Not yet, but we're very close. We had the two people this summer working on it, and it's pretty much done. I think we just need to make a few fixes, check if it works, and merge it. But we're basically done with it. But yeah, it's not merged yet.
Good enough.
For my
go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish, Andy.
The other one was some I don't know if this is LSP standard or it's an editor specific, but an outline view of a program, something that says in a side pane, some nested view of top level, here's the names of the top level controls. You can then drill down and see the tables that are in each one in a hierarchical menu.
Yeah, I think that's part of the protocol. We're not implementing that feature yet, but that would be something that would be pretty easy to add as a feature, I think. I just need to look if that's VS Code specific, but I don't think so.
I don't know if it's VS Code specific or not, but yeah. Of course, Emacs must have 7 ways of doing it, but yeah.
Yeah, the language server should work out of the box with most editors. I checked Sublime, and I think there's a small issue I need to fix to make it work with Sublime. I didn't check Emacs.
That would be
Ideally,
great.
it works out
I
of the
mean,
box.
even if it only worked for VS Code, I would start using VS Code regularly if that worked.
I already
So-
use it, so anything that you can add, hover help and finding definitions is so hard right now in some of our code bases, right? I'd love to have hover help, like to show me what the header type looks like or something, and knowing what file it's in. It would be just where to find or defined would be great.
Hover over action definitions, hover over table names to get table definitions. Yeah.
What we so the plan was to release last Friday. No battle survived to the plan. No plan survived to the battle. So it's going to be postponed a little bit with the administrative madness of the beginning of the fall semester. But then we should be able to really include the go-to definition and think that we have it. Main problem is to find the right way to define the symbol table internally so that we can get those include relationship in a way that makes sense for developers and that allows you to jump from one file to the other. Like you're in a file, you want to go to definition that brings you to the right file instead of using the preprocessor to include the stuff in the AC. Well, it's kind of like tricky to do it in a generic way. So we're working on it, and that should be like matter of weeks, I'd say, to have something which is reasonable on that topic.
I had a question, which was your targeted release date last Friday have anything to do with your talk today date? Or they
the
just
plan
is that a coincidence that those are 3 days apart, or is that by design?
The plan was so the release, so because we're a university, so we had summer interns, so the whole plan was to get like released during the summer. And last Friday was the last day for a lot of interns in the group, so we're like, okay, we're gonna celebrate, we're gonna get the release, and then you offer the opportunity to talk 3 days later. I was like, okay, let's do that.
I see.
Okay. Maybe a little bit of overconfidence.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, like, if those dates were 3 days apart by design, I would love to have you back in 2 months for another talk on an update, so you can plan to release then.
Sure, and actually, I'd be really happy. Well, there's a slide later on this, but collecting feedback, getting those pain points that you're facing when you're developing P4, that can help us prioritize the work, because we've downscaled. We're only 3 working on this during the fall semester, but we have like Alexandre and Noel will continue working on this till next summer at least. So we really want to get something that makes sense, find a way to make it sustainable, so getting interest from people, so that there's the reason to maintain it and stuff like this. So really, we're really totally open to make it evolve, especially considering that we're kind of like losing our P4 contacts with the P4 analyzer being shut down on the Intel side, plus the company we're working on closely, which is Kaloom, is ceasing operation. So we're basically not really able to interact with them anymore. So we really need P4 expertise to not invent our own problems, because, well, basically at Maxart, we're trying to solve problems that people have. So if you're facing those kind of like the table, the hierarchical things you were talking about, the go-to definition across workspace, even the way you include the different files, like there's kind of like good practices convention that we can rely on and leverage, we do need that feedback. So, and we can have like a chat, we can get emails, like anything, but we'd love to get those feedback.
I mean, and one way to get that feedback, I think, would be to that I've done myself is I've got like this open source repos, like here's a bash script, start from a fresh Ubuntu system, install all the open source P4 development tools. I'd be very happy to figure out how to like enhance, add the few lines of hopefully script that installs your stuff too, so that people can more easily try it out if they install it that way, for example.
That'd be cool. That'd be really cool.
If you went on some of the P4 Slack channels or just the mailing list, P4 dev mailing list, and announced a release and here's where to do and how to install it, you'd probably get tons of feedback, more than you wanted. I mean, there's a lot of people out there playing with this stuff. And
Yeah, that's also the problem. That's why we're a little bit shy
yeah.
so far, is that we're a research lab. So, and we're like 4.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like just we need to find that we can't really like say, oh, we're gonna maintain this and at a professional level, let's say. Of course we're gonna maintain this, of course we're gonna work on this, of course we're kind of like not releasing something that is buggy or not. That's why we haven't released the second version yet. But still we can't be like overwhelmed by requests of getting this. That's why we're starting like slow opening, talking to people, going days.
Curated list of beta users, right?
And then
there are a few of my colleagues, and
be happy to contact them and get their feedback and show them how to install the stuff and play with it. That'd be really awesome, because we really go into this slow opening option to avoid receiving. We don't want to make available something that just doesn't fit your needs, and then we'll be like, okay, this is just like one LSP among others, and that's it. We really want to kind of like tailor it and be sure that that's actually fixes problem that people have. That's the approach, let's say.
Let's say you've convinced me I'm not going to publish this video. Everybody who's attending today, you're on the list. If you're not here, you're not on the list. Sorry. Can't get feedback. Just a joke.
So, well, hopefully for Alexandre, there are no PhD advisor negation fields, so the demo worked. Just concluding quite quickly, because we had some very interesting discussions. So what we have so far on Maxer side is a running prototype. Again, it's not a product, it's a prototype of the P4 language server. So we have code completion, we have code to definition, refactoring. You busted it on the include. It's close to work, but not working. That's why it's not released yet. And we have the external plugin manager with the demo that Alexandre was giving with the P4 test. And we're also having a first proof of concept. So it's like even lower TRL for the language server framework with this language agnostic implementation and the rule-based declaration. But I think you're more interested into the first part than the second part. Second part is more like a research toy, and the part that makes sense for you in how we can use this into something that would make sense for you. So we have a visual code extension that is available. Just look for P4 LSP or Maxert on visual code and you can have it. It will automatically install the current version of the language server and will give you access to this. So you can flash that QR code and that will brings you to the marketplace of Visual Studio. And we have this language server implementation. It's implemented in Rust, so we have some type safety verification, and that was a condition for Alexandre to do a master in the group to be able to code in Rust. We're still working on finding the right way to get information from the plugin manager, finding the right feedback from and to developers, and also trying to find we talked a lot about LSP, language server protocol, but there's this new approach, which is BSP, build server protocol, that support the building of things. So it's more into operational dimension, integrating testing and stuff like that. So how can we where the boundary, where the frontier? And that's also related to the kind of question that Chris was asking about what should be done in the compiler, what can be done in the compiler, what can be done in the language server, how can we find the right way to interact between those two? Those are really interesting questions. And also, I really like to emphasize that P4 is an amazing case. I'm not saying this because you're the P4 community, but just it triggers really super nice problems by its ecosystem, the way it's designed, the different things that you need to work on when you're working on P4 code. It's really interesting. And what you're dreaming of is really better support for the P4 community. So, okay, we're going to work on the inclusion with the tailored code completion, filter and sorting. But really, what do you need? What are your use cases? What are your scenarios? What are your requirements? What is needed for you to be able to have a better experience when developing P4 code? Testing, specification, multiple backends, what are your pain points? And that can give us a starting point about how to prioritize the things we need to develop in the system. And as I was saying, we do need your feedback. So there's this form that we're using to gather how you're using P4, which kind of tooling, which kind of external tools you're using in addition to the compiler, which kind of IDE you're working on, which kind of support you're dreaming of, and those kind of things. Your feedback is essential to us. So the more feedback you're giving, the better it is for us to work on that tool. And that will be all for us today. Thank you very much for the invitation, for the lively discussion, for the comment and the questions during the talk. By the way, if you know people interested into doing PhD on those kind of P4 language related problems, we're looking for candidate at MaxCert starting winter or fall 24, so next year. So really, if you're interested in, feel free to reach out. That was my blatant advertisement slide, but that's the only one. Yeah, thank you very much.
What? Any other comments or questions?
Oh, I like this. I just installed it while we were talking. It took me 2 seconds. I'll start playing with it.
You already
let's hope it doesn't
just fired up
crash.
VS Code and found it and hit the install button.
Took like 2 seconds. Yeah, I had VS Code right up here on my other monitor. I just clicked it.
Yeah.
So that was easy.
I was just going to suggest if you get overwhelmed with comments, I think you just need to say like, find some way to put the, bounties on issue reports or something like that.
No, you just have to use some QoS ingress metering or something, right? Drop feedback.
Always believe Chris Summers is high priority.
That's the filtering rule.
Great.
Yeah.
Nice job. I saw it in April and it was really intriguing. And I wasn't sure what the future was going to be at the time, but it seemed like you really leaned into it, and it's very intriguing. I like how you're trying to use what's already out there too, capitalize on it.
Thank you. That's the only way we can build that's the only way we see to build something that makes sense. Because reinventing the wheel, that just doesn't make any sense. There's amazing tools that work, like what's happening with Petra with the symbolic simulation, what's happening with what the compiler knows how to do. Like all the things exist and make sense, but it's different objective than finding the right integration for the developers. So the research question is more which kind of support, how to have this in a reusable way, the effort we're putting in P4, can we reuse that effort into another language? Like that, the kind of things that we're interested in. And of course, if it's taking a path that makes sense for you guys and can support you, well, that's win-win situation. So I'd be really happy if you are okay to denounce colleagues and people who could be feedback provider. I really don't think we're ready for like a grand opening with announcing the world that this P4LS is available, because that's, of course, you can go to Visual Code, you can click install, that works, but this is still rudimentary, and I'm not sure like that. We're not seeking for perfection, because best is the enemy of good. But the whole point is that we need feedback, we need case study, we need scenarios that you'd like to solve through the tool, and based on top of this, we can get like a more fast release cycle, and we can try to integrate this because we have like at least support until next summer to continue developing and continue gathering feedback. And I'm quite confident that if this makes sense, we can continue supporting this like for a pretty long time. But if no one cares, then it's gonna die, like any other P4LS that you can find on GitHub. But if there's people saying, "Oh, I'd like to have this scenario, I'd like to have this," it's again super fun case study for us on language engineering, and always a pleasure to work on those.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Very interesting. Any other comments or questions?
I have one quick technical comment. So Alexandre mentioned that there is a lack of Sublime support.
Yeah.
How difficult is it to fix it? So I've been trying to build a package for Sublime using this language server, but I haven't been able to get it to run, and I wasn't
I don't
sure.
know. I think it's a small thing. It might just be that I think Sublime requires that the language server supports workspaces, and we don't yet. But that's pretty close. Or I can just say it supports workspaces and it won't. I don't know if it's going to break stuff. So I just need to check if it's an easy fix or if we need to wait until we have like include support. And
because the include support will bring this workspace support to able to jump from file to file, so that might kill two birds with the same stone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds great. I will just wait for that then. And I guess the other point is that I guess there's lots of low-hanging fruits for P4 still. So in terms of before even starting with the backends and the target-specific semantics, it's probably, yeah, there's lots of issues like type checking and general just front-end core level P4 semantics that can be implemented. And I guess diagnostic are the most valuable thing for a P4 developer, really. For example, reading from undefined values or accessing an invalid header, for example. Those are the diagnostics that would be very valuable for a language server. And of course, when you get into a target-specific extension, for example, Tofino, there's lots of more restrictions, but those are very specific to that particular compiler, which as a general language server, it's going to be difficult for you to model unless you have a particular extension for it, right? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's the backend specific and the target specific are something that we were thinking of investigating, but later, because exactly of what you're saying. Like there's a lot of things that can be done at the P4 level, and then that's also something really interesting in P4. Like you have this P4 core, and then you have some restriction depending on what you're targeting and different things of working. So it's kind of like adapting the semantics, like really coarsely speaking, and that makes it very interesting from a language server design point of view, because that's usually, I mean, the language server is supposed to be one language server, and we need to be able to customize, activate some features, provide some stuff that are dedicated for one single target. It's really amazing problems.
Oh, vendors might want to release a extension for their targets that they don't put on the open source, but it can be part of their SDK that you know, sign a EULA for and maybe pay for. That could be, but this is a nice framework to put that in.
Yeah, that's exactly why we went.
It would probably reduce the cost of their customer engineering support call because
they will go to me.
Well, no. I mean, their customer engineering could put the intelligence for all these special cases into the plugin, and so they don't get so many support calls. Believe me, I've pestered certain companies with support calls, you know, hundreds of cases, and a plugin would actually save them money.
That was the kind of like essence of the decision to go for that plugin mechanism, being able to, you're designing something which is in-house or proprietary that you want to sell, okay, just like provide it and it's going to plug to the framework. It's just like a puzzle with some empty ports, and you can just plug into, and that's become available for your system.
We're a couple of minutes over the hour, but thanks again for sticking around so long. I would encourage you, when you have any new releases, please consider sending an email to the P4-dev email list, because or at least or some other mechanism that you'd prefer that people sign up for learning about updates. But that would be a great way for me to find out about it, at least. I think a lot of other people here.
Or if you want to keep it real closed circle for a while to avoid feedback shock, you can always send it to this mailing list, right, for this working group.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll keep you updated with the new release that is coming. Like, I think worst case it's end of September, but that should come earlier.
Good job, everyone.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for the invitation.